Now the tale of the tiger's eyelash has very deep roots, reaching back to the days when wars first began and men returned home after them, haunted and broken. Sometimes the eyelash belongs to a bear, but in this version it belongs to a tiger. But wait, we rush on and mention the tiger before it is part of the tale, which actually begins with a young man and woman who, once upon a time, were very much in love, and they married on a midsummer's eve, when the days were long and the sun set late in the evening, and they were happy and content. But in the autumn, when the leaves began to fall, the young man was suddenly called away to war. Time passed. Winter came, then spring, and the following summer, and the war raged on, and the husband did not return. Autumn came again. The nights drew in. Summer birds flew off to distant lands, and the leaves fell from the trees once more. And all the while she watched and waited, as did all those left behind, on both sides of the conflict, all praying for the safe return of their men. Then, all at once, in the depths of the second winter, when snow lay thick and frozen on the ground, news came that the war had ended and that their loved ones would soon return. And so it was. Many men came back, but many too did not. The wives and families gathered in the square to greet and welcome them, and they were glad and relieved to be home, but they were not the men who had gone forth. And the women gasped when they saw them, all ragged and gaunt, and all with the same glazed expression in their eyes. Their families rushed forward to embrace them and to take them quickly home, leaving those who looked in vain for their dear ones, collapsed in broken heaps, weeping and wailing in the deserted square. Now the sun was setting as our couple walked home, and straight away she knew that all was far from well. Her husband would not look into her eyes, and had recoiled from her embrace in the square, and he did not speak a single word. When they arrived at the house, he refused to go in, and he took himself off to the barn, bolting the door tight behind him. The young woman brought food to him and pleaded to be let in, but only silence returned her cries. In the end, she returned alone to the house, and later, from the window, she saw him disappearing into the snowy wood behind their dwelling. Next day, she went out looking for him, but when he saw her coming, he stormed away. She ran after him, calling and calling his name. And so it went on, day after day after day, the young woman chasing and the husband storming away. Until finally one morning, she stopped herself dead in her tracks. I need help, she thought. This is too big a problem for me alone. I will go to the old healing woman at the edge of the village to see what might be done. And she set off straight away and told the healing woman everything. The old woman listened carefully whilst gently stoking her fire. It was not the first time she had heard such a tale, and it definitely would not be the last. She said, staring into the flames. This is a tricky problem, my dear. Yet there might just be a way, a remedy that could be made. But it will require a particularly rare and precious ingredient. A tiger's eyelash, in fact. And that I do not have. The young woman's heart sank, as well you might imagine. But then a gleam and a faraway look came into the old woman's eye, and she looked at the young woman directly, which was actually quite a shock, for she had grown so used to her husband avoiding her gaze. "Maybe," the old woman then whispered, "maybe you could get it yourself." Yes, of course," the young woman cried. "Just tell me where to go and what to do." "It will not be easy," the old woman cautioned. "But if you are sure, I will tell you." "I am sure," she replied, without the slightest hesitation. And the old woman told her everything she needed to know. "Come straight here when you return," she said later, as she waved goodbye, "no matter what." The young wife rushed home as fast as she could, collected all the things she needed for the journey, called out to her estranged husband in the bolted barn, telling him she would be back as soon as she could, and she set off on her way. Now the path ahead was a lonely one to tread, for it led her beyond the perimeter of the familiar village where she had lived her whole life, and onward to a distant snow-capped mountain, at whose peak the tiger, whose eyelash she sought, dwelt in a dark cave. And it was winter too, and the days were short, and the nights went on forever. And there were many times along the way when she looked back longingly to her village and to the tiny lights that flickered in the distant windows. Ahead, there was only darkness and danger, it seemed to her then. But the moon soon rose up and grew to its fullness as she trudged up the mountain's side. And the further away from the village she travelled, the brighter and more radiant shone the stars, and she marvelled at their beauty, even as she shook and shivered, and her hands and feet grew numb with cold, and icy winds howled like storybook ghosts, and blew and buffeted her about, as if deliberately seeking to impede her ascent. But she kept on going, no matter what, and she kept on imagining the old healing woman, and returning to her with the precious eyelash. And in this way, she eventually arrived at the mouth of the dark cave where the tiger lived. She watched and waited, and at dusk he appeared, strutting out of the cave, all fierce and terrible beyond imagining. And the young woman's heart thumped and pounded so hard and so fast she felt she would burst with fear, and her legs wobbled and she couldn't think straight, and all she wanted to do was run. Good thing she had followed the healing woman's advice in advance. Otherwise, we would be telling a very different tale. In her pack, you see, she had put her very best supplies of delicious cured meats, and the plan was that each day she would leave a tasty portion for the tiger, each time placing it nearer and nearer and retreating less and less until such times as she might reasonably ask for one of his eyelashes. And just like they planned, he came, he sniffed, he liked, and he gobbled up the meat. And so it was. Each day she left the meat, each day a little closer, and each day she retreated less. And the tiger came and sniffed and liked and gobbled up his tasty treats. And in this way, the two of them came closer and closer, until finally, when the meat was almost gone, the young woman crept to the very edge of the cave with her offering, and instead of retreating, stood her ground. Now, we cannot say she was not quivering with fear inside, that her heart was not pounding, that she no longer wished to run, because that was not at all true. But we can say that from somewhere deep, deep inside, she found the courage not to flee. And the tiger came and saw and sniffed and liked and gobbled up the meat. And he leaned in close toward her then, so that she felt his warm breath on her face. And he looked her square in the eye. "Child," he said, "you are far from home. What on earth do you want here?" And she leaned in a bit too then, meeting his wide-eyed gaze. "One of your eyelashes, please," she replied plainly. "Then I shall be on my way." "Then take it," he answered, without the slightest notion of why she might want such a thing. "But take it quickly, and then, dear child, leave me to my peace." So gently, but swiftly as directed, she reached out and plucked the precious lash from his eyelid. He flinched, but only slightly, and then backed away. She bowed in gratitude before turning promptly on her heels and running back down the mountain to the old healer as fast as her legs would carry her. I've got it, she proclaimed as she burst in through the door, and breathlessly she began to tell the tale of her adventure. How steep the mountain path, how cold and long the nights, how bright the moon and stars, and how very fierce and terrible the tiger was, beyond imagining. But everything worked out, and now I have it, the tiger's eyelash. And with deep relief, she handed it over. "You have done well, my dear," said the old woman, taking the lash between her thumb and forefinger and holding it up to the light. "Very good indeed." And smiling, she tossed it onto the fire, where it hissed for a moment and was gone. Turned out, you see, that the cure wasn't about the eyelash after all. "Now," said the healer to the wide-eyed young woman, "go home and practice what you learnt on top of the mountain with your poor husband."